Welcome to the Ecodylic Science Podcast, where we explore topics of biology, technology, and behavioral science.
Welcome to Ecodylic Sciences Podcast. You might be wondering what the hell is Ecodylic Science. So before we go into this, we will introduce ourselves. So I will begin by myself. My name is Ahmed Al-Hadi. I am a neuroscientist. I'm also a physicist. I'm also someone who is very fascinated by all forms of behavior, and especially collective behavior. Currently, I'm a group leader at the Center for Advanced Study of Collective Behavior at the University of Constance and the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, and the co-founder of Ecodylic Sciences. And my colleague, Jacob Davidson, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Fast enough. I'm Jacob Davidson. I'm an engineer and physicist, now biologist, interested in complex biological systems. Currently a researcher at FU Berlin, biorobotics, and also guest scientist at Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior. But we're here today talking about Ecodylic Science. So what is Ecodylic Science? What are we doing with this startup venture?
So Ecodylic Science, we just began the company this year, but the idea goes back many years ago. As we are both very excited about collective behavior, Jacob and myself have been discussing, okay, there is all this academic research happening in collective behavior, but why haven't we seen a lot of applications for results from this type of research? And this what really motivated this endeavor to have two major directions. First is technology development, so really working on developing translational technologies that brings major results from collective behavior into applications such as environmental and pharmaceutical sciences. And the second important thing is really an educational mission, because we think part of why a lot of these academic results don't make it to society at large is not many people knows about it, and maybe people need to be educated about it, and that's why we established this podcast. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of exciting areas that, collective behavior in particular could be applied, and this is our research areas.
Great.
Perhaps we should start to talk about collective behavior, which is the topic of this podcast.
So what is collective behavior?
What's collective behavior? So collective behavior is when individuals interact to then produce or do something as a group. That could be a simple definition.
This sounds very abstract. So let's give some examples. So when you see flocks of birds in the sky, when you see a group of fish together, when you see people going to vote together, when you see people protesting in the streets, when you see monkeys fighting in the forest, all of this are collective behavior.
Yeah, all of these are collective behavior. Actually, collective behavior is very widespread in biology and, of course, in humans and human societies. So it's very easy to find examples of collective behavior if you just look around.
Yeah, but part of it not being maybe very well studied, you might say, but people have been doing sociology to study human societies. But what's the difference to the study of collective behavior?
Collective behavior for a long time really just referred to collective motion or aggregation. And this is indeed one type of collective behavior. But in recent years, probably the past 10 or 20 years, collective behavior has really become part of the study of complex systems and really focusing on how the individual actions lead to something, a collective outcome.
Oh, wow. Complex systems. This sounds really complicated. So what is a complex system, Jacob?
It's complex, not complicated. Actually, it's kind of hard to define what a complex system is.
Yeah.
Let's not go into this, but there's a lot of complex concepts from complex system theory that are now a really important part of studying.
So let's break this down into pieces. So before we go into this, as I said, people in sociology have been studying human societies, but what happened is that, as Jacob said, there are interactions that begin to happen between what we can call sociology of animal and human societies and many areas of physics, mathematics, engineering, and computer science. And all of these areas are concerned or unite in studying this complex system. So let's break down some of the concepts that characterize a complex system.
Yeah, let's talk about this. To me, this is some of the most interesting things, finding these connections across different systems. But there's a lot of concepts that apply to collective behavior. Here's a list, and then we can talk about some of the more of these in
Sure.
more detail. We have decentralization and self-organization, emergence, networks, tipping points and stability, and feedback loops. These are all, okay, that was a lot of throwing a lot of
just
terms out there.
overwhelmed me. So let's take them one by one. So what is self-organization?
So self-organization refers to when simple interactions among individuals lead to some outcome as a whole. So a good example of a self-organized system is an ant colony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, an interesting example, self-organization, you could describe open source software or Wikipedia editing.
So can you explain more a bit what is self-organizing about an ant colony?
What's self-organizing is that there's not central control also, decentralization.
Do you mean there is no big boss there that's controlling everything?
No, there's not. The same in a honeybee quality. The queen bee is not controlling everything.
So there is division of labor, and at the end you have a functioning system like ants foraging for food, for example. They distribute labor and...
Yes, they distribute labor. They do many different tasks, but the individual ants are following very simple rules. They're interacting locally with other ants and basing their behavior on this. And then just because many ants are doing this, then this leads to emergent patterns such as searching and finding the best food sources among many. Okay, and I said emergence. This is also an important concept.
So before we go into emergence, but the fact that the individual use simple rules and then there is some complicated patterns that emerge, this sounds like decentralization, correct?
Yes, this can be, decentralization and self-organization kind of go together.
Great. So you talked about emergent properties. So what is an emergent property?
Emergence is a interesting concept. Emergent property is a property of a group which comes about, which you would not predict from the individual alone. So ant colonies are, again, a really good example. By just studying one individual ant or one individual honeybee, you would have no idea how the colony functions, what they're able to actually do. Human societies are, of course, an emergent phenomena, or some more simple emergent phenomena could be traffic, which we all encounter every day.
Yeah. So that's a very important point, and for a long time within psychology, within cognitive neuroscience, behavior have only been studied on the individual level, because there was this understanding is that if I understand a single individual, I can understand the whole group, as if 1 + 1 = 2. But emergence tells us that 1 + 1 is not equal 2. You have something that comes out when the individuals interact that you cannot just understand from studying the individual. Like when you have a single bird getting together with other birds, and then they have a certain migration pattern, or their overall behavior cannot be really predicted from the behavior of a single individual, correct?
Yeah, exactly. This is what emergence refers to.
Yeah, that's great. So we have another concept that you mentioned. It's called tipping point. So what is A tipping point sounds like a very serious concept.
Yeah, so tipping points, also stability and feedback in systems. These are concepts that come from dynamical systems theory.
And that sounds also very complicated. So what is a dynamical system?
We're referring to systems that are interconnected, and that my interaction or what I do then affects other things around me. So to give an example, an ecosystem is a connected system, and the concept of tipping point really applies to an ecosystem. An ecosystem is not just how many trees or how many animals are in the system. There's a connected food web, there's predator-prey dynamics, there's interactions among
the weather system,
the plants and animals that are all feedback into each other to produce the ecosystem.
So dynamical system, the contrary of dynamics is static, so it tells me that there is something changing over time, there is some interaction. And important thing is that the in dynamical system theory, we are able to a great degree mathematically describe this interaction, which makes our research on collective behavior quantitative. So here maybe this was the most important word that we haven't maybe mentioned since the beginning, but it's always in all what the research that we mentioned is the word quantitative. So what sets us apart from humanities or social sciences like approach to study, for example, human societies, is that we have a quantitative research, means it's numbers, means I can have use mathematics to really describe a system. So that's something really important. So let's go back to the tipping point concept. You said dynamical systems, feedback. So feedback means that something like, for example, the weather affects a forest or ecosystem, but the ecosystem also affects the weather, right? So it's not a one direction interaction, right? So what about stability and tipping point?
Stability and tipping points, some examples to illustrate this. Could think of ecosystems, also predator-prey dynamics. Another example, particularly with feedback, then we hope there's stability, is in financial markets, where it's thought supply and demand is enough to provide feedback in order that the market finds an optimal equilibrium.
That's so interesting, because it really reminds me of the financial crisis in 2008. People were really scrambling, especially behavioral economists or psychologists, to find an individual-centered interpretation for the crisis. While it's very obvious after so many years, it was due to institutional problems, structural problems. So this again highlights the importance of collective behavior, not just as an academic endeavor, but something that have big societal implications. So this brings me also to the topic of ecosystems back. So we hear all the time about climate change. Are you a believer in climate change?
Yes, I definitely think climate change. Climate change is a very important problem across for everyone in the world, I would say.
Yeah. So let's say, okay, let me take the picture that you described. The ecosystem is a highly interacting system, weather system, forests, ecology, and animals live in this ecology. So when the climate is first at the origin of climate change is some disturbance in this feedback loops of interactions, and there is now a whole I would say explosion of research really documenting the effect of climate change on the collective behavior of animals. There is a recent study on the effect on monkeys that were on a Puerto Rican island when the hurricane came a couple of years ago, and year after year now we are really recognizing this drastic effects. The issue is that whenever we talk about the origins of climate change, we are very good at saying it's happening because of some collective changes that are happening and in dynamical ways. And we are also warned all the time that we are basically a couple of years close to a tipping point in this, but there is a problem. Whenever we propose any solutions, it always talks about the individual. How can you? What's happening here?
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting concepts to talk about here of phase transitions and tipping points. But let's talk about this individual and the collective actions here. There's you could think of actions as an individual or actions or structures as a collective, and such a problem like climate change is a perfect example where it affects everyone, and collective action would correspond to restructuring the systems, restructuring the interactions among people, and land use and resource use. And so I think a big problem is focusing on individual action, such as if all individuals would change their resource and use habits and their ideas, and we know for certain that this is not going to solve such a big problem by climate change.
Oh, great, thank you. That's a great insight here, because we like the example of the financial crisis of 2008, we are back again into finding individual solutions. Like, you might feel good that you are not using plastic straws, or you are doing your recycling very good, but the question is that does this individual behaviors able to perturb the whole systems? And then also within a collective, you usually have individuals who have more or less influence. So the ones who have more influence on flying with private jets around the world might be causing much more emission that individuals who are just flying every now and then using commercial flights. So this goes back again into what Jacob told us, that we really need to see things in a collective behavior lens. It's just a lens that you wear, this is why we are so passionate about this topic and try to really take our time to define it, is that once you wear this lens of collective behavior, you begin to see things different.
The systems thinking is really important and common in collective behavior. To give this example of taking flights, you say, okay, individuals shouldn't do this, but from a systems thinking view, you could also say we need to change the transportation and the economic systems that make it so easy to take flights that are clearly causing pollution that's damaging to the environment.
Right. And also in addition to study of animals, behaviors, human societies, we have a treasure trove of archive of historical records that gives us insight into human behavior. And recently there have been a big effort into really adding a quantitative understanding for historical trends and especially characterizing this idea of a tipping point. So all over the world, it's really obvious, I hope for everyone, that we are seeing a surge in populist movements. And it's really hard to convince anyone that this can just be reduced to individual behaviors when you have millions of people around the world prescribing or joining this populist movement. So we have to ask ourselves, what can we learn from large-scale historical trends to help us know our past and maybe be able to predict the future, but also, like Jacob said, using systems thinking, be able to identify what are the systemic problems that are linked to this changes, but we see it again and again. Frustratingly, one have to say that there is always the tendency to reduce it to the behavior of an individual.
Yeah, there is. There's it's a lot of course, a lot of points there with, you can talk about the spread of social movements in relation to tipping points,
right,
or also phase transitions going from one normal set of interactions to another set of interactions. And actually, we haven't even touched on social media, where a lot of these things are much more,
You're right,
people come in contact with a lot, and all of these concepts
You're
apply
right.
really completely to social media.
Yeah,
trends.
again, the lens of collective behavior. You talked about, so let's cover, I will cover two things here. As somebody who participated in the protest in Tahrir Square in 2011, and if you remember, first of all, it began in Tunisia, it spread to Egypt, it went to Libya, it went to Syria, but didn't stop there. There was then an uprising, the Occupy movement in the United States. So how did this transnational movement spread? Partially social media, partially global systemic changes. It's very hard to not imagine also how our world that is interconnected is not collective. It's definitely exhibiting some collective behavior.
Yeah, this is a really good example of a tipping point that then led to a spread of a social movement.
Social movement. The second thing that you mentioned is social media. So a buzzword that everyone is using these days: misinformation spread. But yet again, we are trying to find individual-based solutions. For example, let's tag the news that somebody see it on social media, it's misinformation. But no, if somebody already have a certain belief system within a certain structure, even if you put the label that this is misinformation, the person will just ignore it. So you have to think of more creative ways, more systems level thinking, to first understand misinformation. So let's give an example of misinformation. The spread of misinformation during COVID, for example, was at its peak. The origin of COVID, how it spreads, vaccines, side effects of vaccines, and people were siloed in their own echo chambers.
Yeah, so there's the concept of networks that actually we didn't talk about in more detail yet. This becomes really also important to the spread of misinformation, because especially in social media, then information spreads, you get information from who you're connected to, and there's certain network structures. And these networks we're not sampling information from everyone in the world. These networks have certain structures. Maybe some have more connections or influence, and maybe it's very true, especially in US, where there's separate networks that people don't talk to everyone else.
So this is the concept of echo chamber. I think that's a collective phenomena, is that you might have, let's say, we will not name a social media specifically, but you have a social media, its aim was to connect people all over the world. But at the end of the day, all too often you end up with the siloed networks, which we call echo chambers. So how do you understand it? We cannot just understand it by saying, it's the individual is choosing. No, there is something bigger than this. There is something emergent.
Yeah, we need to think about the structures and the networks. And in such cases, then, wisdom of the crowd is also a term maybe people have heard.
So wisdom of the crowd.
It doesn't apply in these cases.
Here we can call it stupidity of the crowd. So another also misconception that sometimes when people talk about collective behavior, it's always wisdom of the crowd, collective intelligence, but the reverse also can happen, right? Yeah,
the wisdom of the crowd is a cool phenomenon, and it definitely happens, but under very certain assumptions. The assumptions are...
Can you give us some example of wisdom of the crowds?
Yeah, so the assumptions are independent sampling of information, and that your estimate or guess or judgment is not skewed largely one way or another.
Wow, this was a mouthful. So
if
can you give us some example?
If I showed a picture of a lot of people in a football stadium and I asked, how many people are in this picture?
Right.
You'd be able to estimate this pretty well.
Right.
But if I asked you and 1,000 randomly sampled people, what's the base 10 logarithm of the odds to win the lottery? Then, okay, if you know mathematics, you'd give a good answer. But if you don't know logarithms, you're going to give a really skewed answer. But also unbiased sampling. This is really broken if your networks are more connected to others. And the information you're receiving to make your estimate is going to be biased by who you're influenced by, and just then.
So to get into even a more concrete example, does this have to do anything with reaching consensus?
So reaching consensus, you mean agreeing on?
Yeah, like in democracy, something that maybe at the heart of collective behavior of humans is why democracy works. You have a lot of people, you vote, maybe the single vote doesn't matter, but something emerged which is some kind of an emergent consensus.
Yeah,
This was studied in fish, right?
Yes, this was, consensus doesn't only apply to human groups, it also applies to, so honeybees also reach a consensus when.
So can you tell us a story about
home site?
So how do honeybees meet in the parliament and discuss some consensus, or what? Can you tell us a story about how this happens?
It's a bit of honeybees choosing a new nest site. They send out multiple nest scouts, and then the scouts come back and convey this information all together inside the current nest.
Sorry to be more nosy, but how do they convey the information? Do they make sounds? Do they produce some pheromones?
I'm actually not remembering the exact form of communication. I think it's a form of dance similar to the waggle dance.
Yeah.
Showing the direction of the new home site.
That's great. So this gives us this,
the sampling of information, and then there's reinforcement of the site that seems more stronger, which would be more bees are coming back to or dancing more strongly towards, and then with this reinforcement, the colony chooses this. But this is actually wisdom of the crowd, because all the bees are interacting and sampling with other bees, and they're able to choose a good nest site like this. So you see, if the bees were only interacting with bees that are coming back from one source, and other bees are only interacting with bees that are coming back with another source,
right,
they're going to have a hard time. Then they talk. They may not reach an optimal solution.
Yeah, this sounds like a smaller scale of what we do as humans.
Right? Yeah, in a way, it is.
Cool.
I think this is one of the interesting things in collective behavior. It's hard to always make so large analogies going from bees to humans, but a lot of these concepts are really the same.
Yeah,
and we can apply
them. And this
them.
brings me to this point is really we have concepts that we are not in every science. You have concepts that you can take and then apply it to bacteria or slime molds, even up to a mouse or some worm, to prime it to humans. But because it seems to me is that if we take evolution seriously, and evolution is really the governing scenario about how biological systems survive, there is some benefit for the general concepts underlying collective behavior. Do you think so?
Yes, and single to multi-cell organisms is perhaps the simplest example of collective behavior.
Right.
So
many
different levels, so many levels of biological organization we can look at through this lens of collective behavior and systems thinking.
Great. So let's revise the concepts that we learned about today. So,
yeah, let's go back over.
So our big topic is collective behavior, and then we used words like self-organization, emergence,
decentralization,
tipping point, phase transition,
feedback, networks,
wisdom of the crowd, and that's it. So these are concepts that we both think really characterize what a collective behavior is. So whenever you hear people talk using this buzzword collective behavior, you have kind of an idea what they might be talking about. So what's next for our next episode?
So next, we talked this time a lot about what is collective behavior, what are some of the concepts to study it. But what's also really exciting now is technology is really helping us to study all of these phenomena in more detail. So the next episode, let's go more into detail in what are these technological advancements, how are they used in different areas.
Yes, and because you might be wondering throughout all our podcast today is how do people study this diverse types of behavior? What are the technologies that allows this? So that will be the topic of our next episode. So before we end, we will make sure to put all the references for articles and in-depth analysis of what we talked about today on the caption of our podcast. And if you have feedback, please reach out to us. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's well said.
Great. Thank you for listening to us. And we hope to see you next time.